Welcome back to another edition of Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. I am your host, Todd Rosales, and we have an extra special episode for you today, folks. Our guest today is, I don't even know how to describe him without giving it away, but he's a friend of Cannabis Lab. He's a friend of mine, and he's someone who, the more I learn about him, the more and more I want to know more about him. And hopefully that'll make sense when we start this conversation. But my guest today won the Heisman Trophy in 1998. He's led the NFL in rushing, and those are probably some of the least interesting things about him. So, on that note, please welcome my guest, the true most interesting man in the world, Ricky Williams. Ricky, thanks for joining, man.
Very kind words. Very kind words. Thanks for having me.
Well, I mean that. It's interesting, right? I obviously came across you when you were playing football when I was a kid, and I've had the ability to kind of get to know you, or at least be around your circle for the past year. And the more and more I learn about you, man, it's just it's so intriguing how deep you've gone, and how much of a different person you are. And it's interesting. People have asked me over and over again who I want to have on this show, who's my ultimate guest. And I say Mike Tyson a lot. And I say that because, he's got Tyson Ranch and everything else. But we look at a guy like Mike, who's known as the baddest man on the planet, right? I wouldn't take a punch from Mike for $1 million. And I honestly mean that because, I probably won't eat right for a long time. But you look at Mike Tyson today, and I look at him, he's like this Uncle Mike. He's like this elder statesman. You see him with younger boxers just going over technique. You listen to Hot Boxing, and he's talking about all these experiences he's had. And I never realized that I had a connection with someone who was similar to that in you, that you have a very similar story, that, you were this badass football player. You looked for contact, you dominated that sport. And then when it didn't make sense anymore, you gave it up to find yourself, and you've reinvented yourself time and time again. And I imagine that's a lot of what you want to be known for now, is what's Ricky doing today, right?
Definitely much more what I'm doing today than what I did 20 years ago. It was great what I did 20 years ago, and it's helped me, get to where I am right now. But all those experiences, weren't about 20 years ago. They were about helping me get to where I am right now. And so I think the real treasure of what I have to offer anyone really is what I have today. Yeah, some people can go and watch old YouTube videos and maybe get some inspiration, but I feel like I've parlayed all those experiences of being a football player, into the things that I'm doing right now, and it's much more fulfilling. And of course, I'm 44, right? And so, kind of what you were speaking to with Mike Tyson is that even your favorite athlete, even Tom Brady, eventually one day will retire and have to reinvent himself. And I think that's the reality about fame and about especially professional sports that no one talks about. That at some time, either in your late 20s to your early 40s, you're going to have to reinvent yourself. And I was lucky to get a jump on that. And when I retired at 27 in 2004, like you said, went to find myself. Because I realized my whole life I'd just been so focused on being a football player. I have no idea who else is in there,
Yeah.
and when I went on that journey, I was pleasantly surprised about what I found inside. That I'm not just a football player, but I'm also a healer. I'm also a philosopher. Both of those things go extremely well with cannabis.
It, it's
Extremely well.
interesting. It's interesting how you discover these things as you get older, and it's funny. I when I met you, the whole astrology thing, the spirituality, I was definitely in the camp of, I don't get it, I don't believe it. And it's because, most of our introductions into astrology is through your traditional horoscopes. And I know where, most people, we'd probably go right down the astrology path here. But, I hear you talk about it, and use it to kind of a way to explain the world, right? And when I look at it, I feel like we all have these different moments on our journey that we can look back at, where it's like, this particular moment affected me, and because of that moment, I went down this particular path. And this is the reason I want to bring it up while you're here, is because you've actually done that for me twice. I've told the story on the show. I met you for the first time, I think I was 15 or 16 years old. We were at the Jay Fiedler football camp, and I remember the only reason I was happy you were on the Dolphins. I'm still a Bills fan, right? So when you were in New Orleans, I'm like, oh, this guy Ricky's cool. And then all of a sudden you're on the Dolphins, and I'm like, I like him, but I can't because he's a Dolphin and I'm a Bills fan. And so you came to the camp, and I remember one of the things that you had said to me, you were subbing in for get off drills. I was a defensive lineman, and you told me I was quick off the ball. And I remember being undersized, and I remember not being the best player. And I remember thinking to myself, well, if Ricky Williams thinks I'm quick off the ball, maybe I am. And if I can just keep people off the ball, that's my thing. If I can just get that first step before everybody else. So it gave me a level of confidence in football, which led to a bunch of other things. But then circle back, your colleague Matt posted that you guys were doing some stuff for Real Wellness. I reached out to you. You spoke at the event. And then when that all went away, I was on the phone with you and Linnea. We were talking about Real Wellness. And I was telling the story about when my mom caught me smoking weed for the first time and how I responded to that. And you asked me, you said, do you write? And I'm like, no, I don't. You're like, well, you're really good at telling a story, and you should. And that moment, it didn't lead me to write, but that was kind of like where I'm like, well, I do like storytelling. Maybe I'll do a podcast. So, you've done this for me. Are there moments along your journey post NFL where you can look back at a certain moment in time or a certain interaction where it's like that particular interaction stands out to me because it made me go down a different path that led me to where I am today?
Yeah, I mean, I've two that come to mind. One of them is football related. It was so my last year playing in the NFL was 2011, and I played for the Baltimore Ravens. And the season ended on a first, there was like 12 seconds left on the clock. We were playing the Patriots for the AFC Championship game. So the winner of this game goes to the Super Bowl. Receiver Lee Evans drops touchdown pass, hits him in the hands, and then he drops it. He catches it, and then he drops it, and they rule it incomplete. He catches that ball, we're going to the Super Bowl. So he drops it. We go to kick the chip shot field goal to go to overtime against the Patriots. And Billy Cundiff, the kicker, misses. Okay. And so last year of my career, my last game playing football was this close, literally this close to going to the Super Bowl. Okay. And so after that season, I was 34. After that season, I was thinking this was so much fun playing with the Ravens, and I could tell this team is so good. I knew if I stay another year and play another year, I'm going to go to the Super Bowl. Okay. Ravens went to the Super Bowl the next year, but I retired. And the reason I retired is it was right after that season, and Bill Parcells and I became really close when he was the president for the Miami Dolphins. And so he reached out to me just to say hello and check in with me after the season. And my response to him was, I had a blast this season. I'm so excited about coming back for one more year, And his response was, he said, you can contribute in other ways, He says, slow down, you can contribute in other ways. And in my mind, I was thinking, this is Bill Parcells. When I, tell him I'm excited about next season, right, he's going to be rah, rah. And his response really hit me in the face. And I had to start thinking about it. And when I started thinking about it, I realized that I can contribute in more ways than just being a football player. And I started to think of all the time and the energy and the abuse to my body that goes into being a football player. And that excitement I had for the upcoming season, almost overnight, it dwindled. And that same night I had a dream, and I saw myself mentoring young men. So I called up John Harbaugh that next morning, and I said, thank you for this opportunity, but I feel like I have a different calling, and it's time for me to move in that direction. So that, a simple text message from Bill Parcells was one. And the other one is related, not to football, but it's related to astrology. So, similar situation, trying to figure out what to do. So 2004, I retire from the NFL, and I give up pretty much everything that was ever important to me because I realized there's something more. And I started traveling around the world, and I found myself at a yoga retreat. Ashram is what it's called. And the head, like that person that ran the retreat, someone told her I was a football player, and she was an astrologer. And so she came up to me and she said, where's your Mars? Mars is the planet of aggression and assertion. And she was curious. She'd never met a football player. So she was curious, where's a football player's Mars? And my Mars, and we talked the whole conversation about my Mars. Okay. And through that astrological conversation, right, it allowed me to look at my life from a different perspective. And the different perspective I was looking from through astrology and talking to this woman, it actually made sense. Okay. It actually made sense. And the magnitude of that experience was, again, I was lost, right? I had no idea where I was going or what I was doing. And that clarity I got in that moment, it changed everything. And not to mention, it led to me realizing that astrology could be a very useful and powerful tool. And so it led to me starting to study and learn astrology.
I love hearing those stories because you did go on such like a definitive and well-known journey after you retired from football, where you've truly lived in a really amazing life. Where I feel like your wants or just how you feel about yourself at the time truly drives you, right? Growing up playing football, loving the game. And I've heard you say this before, when it comes to football, I think it was when your conversation with Brendan and the guys at TFATK, which, by the way, we're going to get to that because I love those guys and I'm extremely jealous, like favorite podcast. But, you have to have like that warrior spirit and you have to be dedicated to it. So football at the time, you saw a path there, you saw the ability to have a platform. And then when that, I don't want to say ran its course, but when that was no longer who you were or where you weren't getting value in your life for it, you're like, okay, forget this. Let's move on to the next thing. Well, I don't know who I am. So that's the current need. So let's go on this journey to figure out who I am. And then everything you learned on that journey now comes full circle to make you this. And it's crazy to look at your resume. I know you don't skip school for anything because your education on herbalism and everything else is important. You have a better attendance record at your age than I did when I was actually attending school full time. And you run businesses and do media appearances and work for ESPN and all that good stuff. So congratulations on that. But all
Crazy.
this culmination comes in to make you this newer, more enlightened person. And it's crazy to me because we look at Ricky in the NFL and you really were a pioneer, right? You really were outspoken about the things that were important to you. You didn't kind of let the media push you around. Even if they put a false narrative around you, it didn't really bother you, right? And
Well,
even
it did at first. It did at first. Like all of these things that you're talking about, it took mistakes. It took getting over my naive, idealistic thinking. It took all of these to get to that point. But the truth is, I started off as a coward. As a coward, when I got into the drug when I got into the drug program, I was ashamed. I didn't want anyone to know, and nobody knew until I failed another drug test, and then the NFL called the team, and I shit my pants. I was a coward. I was like, everyone's gonna know that I smoke. And then I remember I had an appeal. I had an appeal with the NFL, and somehow the appeal leaked. Okay, the appeal leaked and it became public, right? It became, and not supposed to, but it became public that I failed a test for marijuana. And even though it was speculation, right? I remember I was playing in Miami at the time, and I had a friend in town, and we were going to the Keys, and I just kept on driving to the Keys, and I just hid out for a couple of days. But this idea of being the golden child who did everything, I mean, it's crazy, that did everything the right way, the role model, it all came crumbling down. It all came crumbling down when it became public that I failed the test. And so, then I got over my cowardice, right? And I realized that being an NFL player made me a coward. I know it doesn't make sense, but I would go on the field and I'd, be courageous and I'd be the warrior. But when I left the field, right, to maintain, people liking me or whatever, then I became a coward. And when I gave up football, one of the things I got to give up was that fear. And so a couple of months after I retired, they found me, right? ESPN found me in Northern California, and they sent Mike Wallace from 60 Minutes to come interview me. And it's this old guy, and he's like their top dog, right? So they sent in the old elder, and he was berating me, right? Berating me. And that was the first time that I stood up for myself. It wasn't the last, but it was the first time I stood up for myself. And he put me on the spot. He said, if the NFL drug tested you right now, would you pass the test? Okay. And so I'm sitting here, in front of this man, and I'm like realizing this is 60 Minutes, right? It comes on right after Sunday football, and they found me, so everyone's going to be watching, right? How am I going to answer this question, right? I have all these thoughts going on in my head, and my first impulse was to lie, but then I was like, for what, And I said, no, I would not fail a test. And that was the moment, right? That was the moment where I became more than just a football player. You know, when I say that, I think about Colin Kaepernick, right? And the idea of he's done something that I've been able to do. We've been able to turn the platform and the opportunity that football gave. We've been able to turn it into something bigger that's larger than football, and it's made us so that our ideas, our legacy, what we stood for, will last longer than if we were just football players.
Yeah, I mean, everything you just said, man, you kind of paved the way for that. And I really appreciate you saying that you were a coward, right? Because part of what I like to do with the show is show the successful journey of people, like, because we see you one way today, right? And then maybe that's where I make that assumption. I see how you are today and assume you've kind of always been that way. When at the end of the day, it took experiences and life to get you there. On that note, when we look at celebrities today or even in the past, is it dangerous for us to make not idols out of celebrities, but that celebrities have to be perfect, right? I mean, that's where cancel culture is coming in right now. If you're not perfect, if you don't do the right thing all the time, then you shouldn't be idolized. And I have this feeling that when we look at these people who we all look up to because they're popular and they entertain us and everything else, when we look at them as these perfect specimens and then find out that they're not, that's harmful, when in reality, when we realize that they're also flawed human beings. And at the end of the day, what makes a great artist? The more flaws, the better the artist, right? And when we realize they're flawed human beings, that maybe that's something we can relate to more, and have a better relationship with our quote unquote idols. Do you think that's dangerous, how mainstream media makes everybody out to be golden childs?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. It's an interesting question because, and I had to wrestle with this a lot, being a role model and then being in trouble for failing drug tests before failing drug tests was cool. so I thought about it a lot, and what I realized was, to me, a role model isn't someone that's perfect, because no one can follow that model, right? no one can follow that model. The true role model is someone that goes through process. Not only that goes through process, but goes through process and becomes a better person because of it. So, I look at my whole story, and when I when I retired from the NFL, pothead, the story was a negative story, right? It was a negative story, but the truth is I was in process. Okay. And if I would have bought that negative story and lived it out, we would not be talking right now. I promise you that. Right. But I didn't buy it. And I realized this is an opportunity for me to make the most of it, like everything. And so I did. And I realized that, because when people tell the Ricky Williams story now, it's a positive story, right? I think, it parallels when people tell the Cannabis story. Okay. It's not all the way positive yet, but compared to 15 years ago, it's it's changed a bunch. And at least in my head, I tell myself that I had at least a tiny bit to do with it. One, because I finally told the truth, and two, because I've done something with my life.
So a few things there. It's and to throw this back to kind of compare it to my own life experiences, and that's really how I understand things. Not nearly on the level of talking to Mike Wallace at 60 Minutes, but going back to that story where my mom was in my house, she smelled it and asked me about it. I remember taking that step back and pausing and thinking to myself, I should lie. I should lie to her and just go through. And then I remember thinking, like, well, I own my house. I have a good job. I'm doing pretty well in life. Why am I lying? What am I lying about? I'm not harming anybody. And I remember there's this freedom in telling her, where I just felt so much better. And her reaction was just like, well, be safe with it. That's all. She wasn't mad. She wasn't that angry, because I think she realized that. And I feel like there's this power that comes over you when you do that, right? And it's interesting now when you talk about your story, and I get mad when because I talk about you and some of the things that we do, and I get mad when people are like, "Oh, Ricky, yeah, he quit the NFL for weed." I'm like, well, let me talk to you about that, right? Well, do you know that they forced pain pills on him? Do you know that he had an ulcer? Do you know? And then it's funny. Not only do I educate them on your story, but then I go into the education on cannabis in general. I imagine you're probably at a place where if people say that to you, it doesn't bother you nearly as much. I feel like I get more upset about it than you do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a big black dude. People don't say it in front of my face. so if they do say it, I don't hear about it. But yeah, if I did hear, sometimes I'll have fun with it. I'll say that was only part of, I say, yes, that's only part of the story. Because when I retired, it was funny. This is where I knew there's something going on here. Okay. So I retired from the NFL, and there's this big controversy around cannabis. And a friend of mine told me she was taking a trip to Fiji and going to Samoa. And so I was like, well, I'm not going to stick around here because it's just people talking shit about me on the news. So I was like, I'll go with you. And so we went to Samoa. We went to Fiji. Okay. And we were in Fiji, and we were taking a bus. We were on a bus in Fiji. Okay. And we were sitting in the back of the bus, and some guy like walks into the back of the bus, and he sits down next to us, this young guy, and he starts talking to us. And again, when I travel internationally, no one knows who I am. Having this conversation, he has like this little Tupperware thing with food, and he offers us some food, and we eat, and we have this really cool conversation. And then out of the blue, right, cannabis comes into the conversation. I didn't bring it up. My friend didn't bring it up. This kid that we met on the bus in Fiji brought it up. And so he was like, yeah, he's like, my uncle grows some, so we should stop by. And so we stopped by his uncle's place, and they this guy, like, he goes up into like these trees and these mountains, and then he comes back down like 20 minutes later, and he has this stalk, right, this cola that's literally 1.5 foot long. And I'm like, and again, I was just, this was 2004. I'd never seen like a cola before, ever, And so I saw this, and I was like, it really is a plant, like it hit me, right? And it found me in Fiji, okay? Then a couple of days later, I went to Samoa, a slightly different situation, but quite similar. A random person meets me, and somehow cannabis comes into the conversation, right? And keep in mind, before this point, I've been a football player my whole life, so I hadn't really been able to get out and travel. I was in this bubble, right? I didn't realize that, there's a whole world out there. And so then after Fiji, I end up in Australia. And the kicker is I meet this guy who lives in the swamp. He lives in the swamp, and he grows cannabis in the swamp. And he's just like, he's this hippie, Mystic Steve is what we call him. This hippie that lived in the swamp in Australia, and he grew the best buds. I mean, he would bring me some every day, and it would like smell like honey. And then when you smoked it, you would like taste the flavors. It was otherworldly. And so just having these experiences and realizing, okay, like, I didn't ask anyone, I didn't do anything, and it found me. I call it the weed fairy at the time, And I realized there's something bigger around this plant going on than what I've experienced to this point. And it really set me on studying, exploring. I went to India, studied Ayurveda, because I found this Ayurvedic book, random Ayurvedic book written in the 70s. Okay. Ayurveda is the traditional medicine system of India. And this little book, it's not here, but this little book had a whole chapter on cannabis. And again, back in early 2000s, you didn't see medical books, whole chapters on cannabis. And so I realized there's more to the story than what we've been told. And I dedicated my life more or less to really, finding some answers.
It's crazy how it kept finding you, and it just became part of your journey. And I don't think a lot of people realize that, when you did it or you tried in the NFL and you failed the drug test, you weren't the guy who's being photographed in all these grow houses and doing your own plants yet, that it took a journey to get there. And just kind of breaking the story here. I've listened to a lot of interviews with you over the past 3 weeks, I'd say 4 weeks, whenever you launch Curious Questions. I've listened to a lot of your stuff, and I go on binges like that. Whenever I discover, new people, mostly comedians, you're definitely the first athlete, but you have so many interesting stories to tell, dude. Like, you talk to business people on these podcasts and everything else, and typically they have the same 2-3 stories that they tell on every show, and they figure out a way to get into them. The backlog of stories that you have with the amount of detail is incredible, dude. I mean, this is all just from, retiring to the NFL till now. It's crazy. You'll tell one story on Fighter and the Kid, then another one on Jason Ellis show, another one on the Adam Carolla show, and also finding a clever way to plug all the shows you've been on lately. But, it's interesting that you have, this is just you being you. And like, I imagine this conversation, this is something I've always wanted to have with you on that back patio of yours, smoking a joint and just picking your brain about your experiences, because they're fun. And like, from someone who loves telling stories, I can appreciate that about you. Switching over to the conversation on the evolution of your cannabis use, right? Because this is something I think about internally and something I like to talk to people about. I remember, so the first time I ever tried cannabis, I was 16, took a hit or two. I was doing other, was drinking at the time too, not a great kid. Didn't remember it. I was abstained. I played football. I didn't do drugs, didn't drink that much. College comes around, sophomore year of college, going into the semester, before everybody's out there, there's a bunch of guys would hang out at my house every day. They'd smoke weed and watch movies. And I was bored as shit, and they were having the time of their lives. So I'm like, all right, let me jump into this. And we watched Super Troopers, and I had a chip witch, and it was a great experience. And I started using it more and more, and then it turned to Fridays. My buddies would go to this one bar where you had to be 21. You couldn't use a fake ID, and we would stay home, rip a grab. We would make one of those like waterfalls where you take like a Gatorade bottle and put the water in it and let it run out. Now they have the student glass, but this is what we did in college. And we would watch stand-up comedy. I remember watching Gary Goldman's special, and I was literally on the floor rolling. So, I look at it when I first started with cannabis, I guess you would say I would use it purely recreationally. But then once I graduated and I got a job and I realized that I had a high stress job in sales, it would help me sleep better. Once I started, dating my current wife, it would help me with introspection and figure out, like, if we had a fight, like, oh shit, I was wrong. I shouldn't say it that way. And over time, it's gotten to the point where it's like, I know now how to dose and integrate it into my life to get the right effect. And it's crazy to think for me, and I feel like you're in the same boat, that this all started because I just wanted to get high and laugh at things, right? So smoke as much as I can. So do you have a similar story about how you've evolved your cannabis use over time to really become, a medicine?
Yeah, it's extremely similar. I mean, the first time about the same age. I wasn't drinking, it was at lunch. It was at lunch, and I remember I had physics. I had physics right after lunch, and I remember sitting in class thinking, I don't know why people do this. And again, it was the same thing. I was a jock, right? And jocks at the time, there was usually maybe one on the team, but most of the jocks didn't smoke. And then I got to college, and kind of the same thing. My roommate was a smoker, and when the guys would come over and hang out, I would do it just to be with the cool upperclassmen. But I would be relaxed and we'd be having a good time, but I really didn't think anything of it, and I wasn't really a big drinker. And then, it's funny, I told this story. I tell this story a bunch, and I told this, and usually it just goes like this. And I told this story, I was on Shannon Sharp's podcast, and I told the story about my senior year in college. My girlfriend started dating the quarterback, and that was stressful for me for obvious reasons. And Shannon, I didn't realize it, but he was like, he wanted to get the details. And so I started going into details about the story. And, because I'm a wide open book. Someone asked me a question, I can't help but answer the question. And so I started telling the stories. And the next, 2 days later, I have this nasty message on Facebook from my ex-girlfriend in college. I was like, okay. I was like, I thought I was just telling a funny story about why, the first time I really appreciated the value of cannabis, because I wasn't obsessing over her and the quarterback and what they were doing, in my mind, I could sleep, right? My mind could go to thinking about winning the Heisman Trophy. And so like, in that year it was tough. It was funny because that same quarterback, right? He was a backup quarterback, right? And then in our second game of the year, our starting quarterback broke his thumb. And so then the guy that was, now dating my girlfriend was now the starting quarterback, right? So it was rough, and I got off to a rough start, and I think I got shut down by Kansas State. And so I was like, damn, I'm not going to win the Heisman, and I lost my girl to the quarterback. And my friend was like, dude, you need to chill. And so he brought out his little bong. I hit it a couple of times. And true story, okay? I slept that night, started to get my mind right, back-to-back 300-yard games, okay? Back-to-back 300-yard games. And so for me, I couldn't deny my experience, right? That something about this thing I'm not supposed to do helped me. It helped me. But it was so early, and there was still all of the ideas and the conditioning about this is bad. And so I was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. I get to the NFL, and it's everywhere. I mean, Hall of Fame lineman in New Orleans invited me to his house, as a rookie, and said, essentially, this is the talk you need to have from the vet, right? As he was having the talk, he was rolling a blunt, you know, and then he got and then he got his Vicodin and crushed it up and then and then laced the joint with Vicodin. And he was like, "Welcome to the NFL."
Oh my God. You sure you weren't on the set of Any Given Sunday, dude?
Oh my God. Welcome to the NFL. And I was like, cool, right? And that worked. And so what I learned in New Orleans, I had more money and, you know, I had people, so I could like buy more cannabis and start to use it on a daily basis. And it became part of my nightly ritual. You know, football is a rough game and it's stressful. And so after work, I'd come home, my roommates and I, we would roll up and smoke and chill. And it was great. Then I got traded to Miami and I was by myself. And so it started turning into these solo smoke sessions. And what I found by myself, the mind does something different than when you're with other people. I got really introspective. And that same experience, I was still a father, but I was a young father at that time. And, you know, during the daytime in football mask, I was a selfish asshole, right? But at night by myself when I'd smoke, I became more reflective. I could see myself from a distance and realize that doesn't feel very good to be like that towards my girlfriend or towards my kids. And I started making changes in my life. And part of those changes led to me questioning, is being a football player really what I'm supposed to do? Or is it just what I think I'm supposed to do? Right. And I feel in some ways cannabis gave me the courage to ask those questions, right? To ask those questions, that this, at least the space for those questions to arise in my consciousness. And so, you know, and that was right when I get to Miami. But in New Orleans, we were tested because the NFL used to test once a year. And we were tested during training camp in New Orleans. I got traded to Miami. We were tested in the off season. Didn't get the memo, failed the drug test. So when you fail a drug test in the NFL back then, they put you into not a rehab, but they put you into a drug program where you was tested 9 times a month. And I had to talk to a doctor once a week for an hour about my issues. Okay. And so that definitely changed my relationship to cannabis, you know, because at this point now, if I fail another test, you know, it's $700,000, right? Gone.
Oh.
And then also it becomes public, right? All these there's greater consequences now, right? And before, where I could just smoke and as long as I pass the test, I can do what I want. Unless I was caught driving and arrested, there really were no consequences. And so as the stakes went up, right now, if I get caught again, I'm in a lot of trouble. Like I said, it changed my relationship, and I thought I'm staying away from it. I'm not touching it. Okay. Football season starts to go on, right? All this stress and dealing with all this. And so I'm like, you know, what am I going to do? Right. And so I found a little system, you know, where I could smoke a little bit and still pass tests. Okay. And it worked for like 2 years almost. And then, you know, I had a bad night. We lost to the Eagles on Monday night, overslept, didn't do my ritual to pass the test. I ended up failing a test. And then again, my relationship changed again. Right now, if I fail, I'm kicked out of the NFL. And so ended up retiring instead of getting kicked out. But there I was, right? Still trying to figure out my relationship with cannabis. And then that leads to the story I told about when I retired. And so, you know, in Australia, all that stuff, I ended up coming back to California. And the weed fairy followed me to California. Okay. So I was in, and I didn't know. Okay. This was 2004. I was a dumb football player back then. Okay. I ended up in this town called Grass Valley. Okay. I just thought it was called that because there was grass there. Okay. But the real grass. And so I get up to Grass Valley to start studying Ayurveda, to start my healing journey, my educational journey. And I was at Radio Shack one day, getting something for my computer, if you guys remember what Radio Shack was. And the guy that worked at Radio Shack, Charlie, he became a good friend of mine. You know, he started looking at me, and then if you've been to Grass Valley, there's like 2 Black people in Grass Valley. So I was in Radio Shack and he's looking at me. He's like, I think I know who you are, right? And I kind of smiled at him and I was like, cool, give me my stuff, you know? and then I walked out to my car in the parking lot, and the guy like came after me, like running. And I was like, what, did I forget something? And he reached in his pocket and he gave me one of those little old film containers, you know? Mm-hmm. And then he walked away. And so I was like, okay. And I opened it and there's like a big smelly bud in there. And I was thinking to myself, like, this is cool, you know? People just walk up to me and give me weed. I was like, I can get used to this. And a couple of days later, I was in Grass Valley, and it's really rustic. And so I had a Humvee at the time. I took my Humvee down to the lake, and I was driving back up the mountain to leave the lake. And there was this guy stuck on his bike. And so I was like, do you need a ride? So I threw his bike in the back of the Hummer. And then when he got to the top, and he got his bike out, and he came and he shook my hand, and he was palming a bud. And so I was like, I really like this. And then come to find out the next couple of weeks that, Nevada County is one of the biggest grow counties in California, and didn't realize like half of my neighbors were growing. It just was cool to end up in that environment where there wasn't so much judgment, and it was more open-minded, and most people were growing. And that's when I started to experiment with herbs and cannabis, right? That was the birth of Real Wellness. And so I just, what I learned from that is when you listen to your heart, right, it takes you places.
It's a different experience, like you said, when it's an open environment and you don't have to worry about the stigma. When it's, when you're out in public. And I remember, it's funny you bring up New Orleans. I remember going on a trip to New Orleans with my friends, and I had a buddy of mine who drove over from Pensacola, and we had a couple of joints, and I remember trying to just find a place to smoke it, and just the paranoia of being somewhere on the street. And then I remember fast forward to last year when I came out and stayed with you. We're sitting in the garage, we're talking about Real Wellness stuff. And I look at Lene and I'm like, hey, you mind if I spark one up in here? She's like, yeah, why not? I go, oh, we're in the front of the house, someone might see it. She's like, you're in California. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I can just, and this is your house, I can basically do this here. And I'm so used to the stigma, but when it's open and the conversations there where you can really find how to leverage it medicinally, nutraceutically, and really integrate it into your life the right way to get the benefits. Where, listen, don't get me wrong, I still love smoking a fat joint and watching Super Troopers and eating junk and laughing my ass off. But there are plenty of times where I can take a hit or two or an edible or whatever it is, just to kind of clear away the stress or focus on what's important or laser focus in on a task. And that's what I've learned since joining the industry, where I've had people like you and other people where I can have those open conversations with. It's funny, we talk about educating yourself on cannabis, and you talk about how you found a book and you were able to dig into your studies. Your first guest on Curious Questions, Eben Britton, really was one of the people who educated me on the endocannabinoid system and how to leverage cannabis and the medicinal values of it. And it's crazy to me that I've had so many doctors on this show, and we have all these doctors across the country. They're not learning this, right? And I make the comparison to where it's like, my dad's a mechanic. If there was an entire system in the car that you didn't tell him about, he probably wouldn't be very good at fixing your car, right? So it blows my mind that you, as an herbalist, the average citizen might look at you and be like, well, that's crazy. That's all bullshit. But at the end of the day, that's a whole nother part of medicine that our medicine's not looking on, where it really is two halves of the whole. And I've heard you talk about this, and I love it, where you're like, the stuff that you're doing is more of the maintenance and preventative and making sure that you're healthy and trying to prevent yourself from going to the doctor. But at the end of the day, if someone's got to cut into you and operate on your shoulder, you want the pharmaceuticals, right? And I love hearing you explain it that way.
Well, it's interesting. It's not that I want the pharmaceuticals, is I want the surgeon's knowledge of anatomy and how to put it back together. Because even when I was in Canada, and this is really what woke me up to the power of herbs. I played a year in Toronto, and I broke my arm, and so my arm just snapped in half, and I had to have surgery to like put the arm back together. And they gave me morphine in the hospital, and I remember getting home and feeling like really sick to my stomach, like I'm not going to be able to take these opioids right now. And so my neighbor said, there's a homeopathic, they have these things everywhere in Canada, there's a homeopathic dispensary down the street, you should go check it out. And so I went and I got some arnica, little like arnica sugar pellets, and thinking to myself, there's no way these things are going to help with this horrible pain. And I took a couple of them, and I didn't feel any pain. It was strange. I was like, there's no way these things are helping me more than like the drugs that the doctor gives me. And I didn't believe it. But every day I took them and it worked. And so I couldn't hold on to the idea that herbs don't help. I just couldn't. I thought that before, but after that experience, again, there's something to herbs when they're used skillfully.
Yeah, and I go back to timing and things that kind of check your, affect your journey in your life. And, I came out and stayed with you at a really interesting point in my life. I had just lost a job that I was, very much loved. I had a daughter coming in 2 weeks. I had no clue how I was going to support my family. And it's interesting, like coming out with you and staying and dealing with Linnea and Matt and all that. It kind of gave me direction of where I wanted to go, but also like becoming a father and a husband and having people depend on me, and being around you and Linnea at the same time, I think opened my eyes to that herbalism and that kind of preventative thing where it's like, I've got to be around here for people. I don't want to be the doctor in 5 years and him say like, hey, you got to eat a few more salads, bud, or you're not going to be around here much longer. Um, but looking at the things that you do, like, I looked at it and I'm like, I can integrate that into my life. I can integrate teas and these herbs and the things, the products from Real Wellness as well into my life. And if that's truly going to help me out, then why wouldn't I do that? Right. And I look at the way that you view the world, and it's cool because between astrology, I feel like with astrology as your guiding principle that kind of explains the world to you and gives you, um, going back and just an explanation of why people do the things they do, and then leveraging something like cannabis and the other things that you have that give you the ability to kind of get out of your own body and get out of your own viewpoint. I think together those two tools are very powerful, and I'm not saying that those two tools alone. My wife studies psychology. She's an addiction counselor, but she's a master's in psychology, and we talk about human behavior a lot. And I think just my obsession with psychology and that mixed with cannabis really kind of helps me and guides me. It's in a similar spot. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but
Well, I mean, I know where you're going with it because
I'm
so
glad one of us does.
yeah, so psychology, psyche is the Greek word for soul. Um, ology represents logos, the word. So it's really about understanding the soul. Psychology is about understanding the soul, which obviously is a spiritual aim. Okay, and cool thing about astrology is astrology helps you understand kind of where things fit, right? Where things fit. It's a language, and so for any language to be useful, it has to be able to name certain things, okay, and help us categorize them. And so everything in the world can be categorized astrologically, okay? Everything in the world can be categorized astrologically. And so the main astrological category for cannabis is it's related to the sign Pisces, also the planet Neptune, which are spiritual symbols. And so what they have to do is transcendence, right? And what we've both shared about our stories is this time where we've transcended our egos, right? After work, right? We were there sitting there having a sesh, and we transcend our ego and we look down and we're like, damn, you are, at least me, damn, you are so selfish, dude. Like, you need to get over, right? We transcend ourselves and we receive inspiration, okay? But also part of Pisces and Neptune is all kinds of anything we use to escape, okay? And so, when I talk about this, I talk about escape as a humane, right? As something that's humane, that we all need an escape, okay? We all need an escape. One version of escape, and I think this is the positive use of cannabis, is we escape to receive inspiration, right? And to look down and to have separation from our little ego, our chasing money or chasing love, right? All the
Yeah.
earthly, right? And we get perspective, and we can, okay, we can see the whole picture more, all right? But also on the negative side of escape is we have that need to see the big picture, right? But we don't have the connection. And so we might use cannabis or any kind of substance or TV or porn or whatever we use to escape. But we get the transcendence, but we don't get the inspiration, we don't get the wisdom.
Yeah.
And so I think the big issue for me is all of the propaganda around cannabis telling people that it's bad, right? When we internalize that what I'm doing is bad, it becomes an obstacle to receiving what is not bad about this plant. And the deeper thing is we all need moments of transcendence, right? Call it prayer, call it meditation, call it sex, right? We all call it we all need this, right? And I think if we realize this is an authentic human need that we've been shamed for traditionally, that allows the healing to come and people to realize, right, that there's something beautiful that can come from rising above everything, getting that perspective. So then when you come back down, your life is more fulfilling, right? You can connect the dots. It makes more sense to you.
It's 100%. And, I relate to the things that you're saying so much because I can't tell you how many times. And yeah, I have done that where you look down, you're like, you're selfish. And it's funny. I can't tell you how many times my wife is like, you smoke weed and you're nicer to me. I'm like, no, well, what happened is we had a fight. And then I had a whole conversation with myself about that fight, realized that I was wrong, and I'm apologizing to you. I'm like, you don't understand what happened between the last time you saw me and now. I'm like, there's me and me out there having a conversation about this, a whole knockdown argument that you missed. So,
well, that's a great example. Some people, right? They have a fight with the wife, they go to the bar and they drink the fight away, or they smoke the fight away, right? But I think with cannabis, it's a little easier that when after you have a fight, you smoke and you start to reflect on what the hell just happened, right?
Yeah.
What the hell just happened? And usually part of Pisces, Neptune, and cannabis is compassion, right? Is compassion. When we have that transcendence, that different perspective, it allows us to have compassion.
And I think it's interesting then trying to take that experience and kind of twisting it into not just introspective on things that happened in the past, like, okay, I had this fight, let me look at it, but kind of analyzing the day ahead of me and or what the things I have to do, right? And I can tell you, I'm at a point right now where there is a good amount of stress in my life. I've got one child, I've got another one on the way. I know you're well past that. You've got a child on the way as well. I've got to make sure that I work. I want to grow this show. There's so many different things that I'm doing, and it can easily cloud my mind. And there are certain times where in the morning, if I take a hit or two, it blows the clouds away and lets me just focus on that day. Like, what do I have to do today? What do I have to do to get through today so I can be the best version of myself? I could, provide for my family and be a good father and husband. And then, I'll deal with the other stuff when I need to deal with it. I hear you talk about your morning ritual and it's smoking and reading a book. How does that really kind of help you start your day? Does it put you in a certain mind space? Does it kind of help you prepare? Like, just walk me through your morning ritual.
Yeah, well, if I'm being 100% honest, a lot of times I wake up and I'm like, like this, like, oh my God, like all this stuff to do today, right? Just this waking up with this like negative attitude. And it's not every morning, right? Some mornings I wake up and wake up excited about the day. But either way, there's something about my ritual where I clear my mind and I set my intention, right? I talked about, this need to escape from like the over too much energy on the ego concerns, right? Of course we have to have an ego because we have to function in this world, but when we become too concerned about these things, it bogs us down, right? I think our hearts really desire to be as light as a feather, right? But I think when we get too bogged down, it's too much. And so for me, that morning ritual is a reminder, right? It's a reminder to keep my heart light and to keep my mind open. And then so I open the mind with cannabis, and then I take in wisdom. And then I come in here and I do my yoga, my Tai Chi, and I bring it into my body, right? And then I start my day.
It's funny. So when I stayed at your house, I remember waking up that morning and going out to the patio, which is beautiful, and seeing you sitting there and smoking, and you had the book, and I'm like, can I join you? And I remember I'm sitting there, I'm like, I was freaking out because I still remember the Ricky Williams that I saw when I was a 16-year-old kid. I'm like, oh my God, Ricky Williams is sitting right there. Like, he's just hanging out, smoking a blunt, reading a book. I've got to talk to him. I've got to talk to him. What do I say? I go, wait, he's reading. I don't want to mess that up. What if I'm like, and all I could think about at that point was, I don't want to mess up his morning ritual because what if he gets a bad grade on a test or something? Like, I didn't know how spiritual you were that if I just threw your morning off, like it would just throw your whole day's energy out of whack. I was so scared, man.
Well, to me, part of being spiritual is accepting every single thing that comes to me as this is what I need to deal with right in this moment. And so you coming out there, like, you're in town, like, let's break bread this morning.
Yeah, man. Well, next time I'm just gonna sit down and have a conversation with you like this. But I remember seeing that. Now I feel a lot more comfortable. But it's like, you meet your heroes all of a sudden. It's like I kind of had met you. I kind of knew you weren't this big egotistical guy that an NFL player you would imagine would be. I knew that you were friendlier, but also I also knew that you you were very into intriguing conversations and deep conversations. I'm just like, at the time, I'm like, well, I read like 10 comic books in flight here, so I'm not sure if those are the type of conversations he wants to have.
Oh my God. It's true though. It's true. Like I think the one thing that does annoy me sometimes is incessant small talk. And that's just a personal preference for me. Is like for me, and small talk doesn't mean you have to be well read. It just means you're willing to be vulnerable and share part of your own perspective and your own experience. Because to me, anyone that shares their own unique perspective is instantly interesting, right? Instantly interesting to me.
Yeah, and I've noticed that's when we've had the best conversations. Funny enough, most of the best conversations I've had with you, I didn't know you were listening at first, and I'll take like we'll talk about like the cannabis markets across the country, or the story about my mom catching me and everything else, and all of a sudden you pop on the phone, you're like, "What about this?" Or "That's cool. Well, what do you think of this?" And I'm like, "Oh, you're there? All right, let's get into this." So, of course, that morning I probably would have been like, "Hey, how's it going? You enjoying that? Is that a good blunt?" Like, it would have been terrible. So I'm glad
That would have
now.
that would have gone bad for you, yeah.
Well, it was fun, and I think we've gotten past that, man. Listen, I want to talk about the podcast and everything else. So I am unfortunately going to switch to the fanboy here a little bit here. But you
Yeah.
launched Curious Questions, because we got to promote what you're doing, man. You got two businesses, three businesses. I don't know how many businesses you've got. I know you're working on Leela. You've got Heisman going on. You've got Curious Questions, dude. About the
Well,
podcast. So I I love podcasts. So I, like most people, when Elon Musk took the hit of the blunt and the Rogan experience, it brought me into the podcast world, because until then I would only listen to the Rogan episodes with the comics that I knew. And then I went deep, and you've been into this network, but all of a sudden you launched a podcast. I'm like, all right, that's gonna be interesting. I wonder what it's gonna be. And I just assumed someone finally talked you into doing another sports show, right? And then I find out that it's really gonna be the Ricky that I get to see and hear. But then the coolest part about that was, it wasn't just going to be your own little universe. You start doing all these other shows. So I see you on Fighter and the Kid. I see you on Adam Carolla, Jason Ellis show, Jim Jeffries. I mean, and it's so cool because I get to see you everywhere. And I'm glad now that my friends and the people that I talk to, that I've been telling stories about our interactions to, get to see the real you. I mean, are you got to be having fun doing all this?
I'm starting to. I'm starting to. The first one with Eben was fun. The other ones were the first couple few there were it was hard because it's similar, and I'm gonna say, kind of what I said earlier in this conversation is in regards to me coming public, with astrology. I was a coward, and I was a coward again. And yeah, people would say, yeah, he's a philosopher, he's open-minded, he's into interesting stuff, but still, right, I kept it to myself how much, that what I think about 24 hours a day is astrology, all I think about, but I kept that inside. And so when I had the opportunity to create my own podcast, I thought this is a great opportunity to come out of the closet. And so it was hard because I'm taking this thing that most people, especially the people my age, football fans, right? They just have never come across it, and I didn't come across it, and I had to retire and end up in some weird yoga place to come across it. So it's bringing something to people, and in a certain extent to the world, that I think is the future. I'm convinced it's the future, and I see the parallels between my story and my history with cannabis and my story and history with astrology. Is I think how cannabis is big and it's still growing. Astrology's coming next, and
I,
not to
I,
toot my own horn, but I had the vision for cannabis, and I think I have the vision for astrology.
I'm not
So it's
sure I can
interesting, like
disagree
like
with you
Jason
there.
Ellis, like Jason Ellis, like this conversation, right? I think I'm talking to him tomorrow, and I got the moment where I get someone's chart. It's a magic moment because you experience a person like I experienced him on the podcast, and I got a sense that there's a lot going on with this guy, and I had some
Oh,
ideas about what it might look like in his chart. But when I actually got his chart and I saw it, I was like, holy shit, this is going to be a very interesting conversation.
I am very excited for that episode. So Jason Ellis was another one that I didn't know who he was. I didn't know him when he was a skateboarder. all of a sudden he pops up on the Howard Stern show. So you look at this microphone, that's where part of my inspiration comes from, is the Howard Stern show. And, you know, Jason Ellis comes up, and then all of a sudden I start seeing him on a lot of the other podcasts that I listen to. And, you know, he's like you, man. He is an open book. So I'm very excited to see what you guys talk about. Like I really think out of anybody who's really going to get him to go deep, and I'm just really excited to see the conversations you've had, because I watched the one where he was driving the conversation, and you know, you guys covered a lot of topics, but really with you breaking into his spirituality and just him as a person, I'm really excited to see that.
Yeah, yeah, I am too. I mean, it's going to be, and again, I didn't know that much about him when I did the podcast. And then after, you know, was talking to my wife, Linnea, about it, and she did a little research on him, and she's like, you know, and we'll get to it, but that he came out as being bisexual
Yeah.
a couple of years ago. And, you know, the cool thing about astrology is you can look at dates. So we looked at the date he came out as being bisexual, and we can see what was going on in his chart. And so it's going to be a really cool conversation. But you know, back to your question, I'm loving it because it's giving me the ability to be myself. It's weird. Like I'm doing these interviews, and I feel as I'm doing these interviews that I'm more myself. I'm just as much as myself, more or less, as I am with close friends and my wife. And that feels good, right? To be out there in a public way, like being my unique, weird self into crazy stuff. And I love it. And that's been the most rewarding part. You know, I know how it goes when you're doing something new. You know, it takes a while to become really good at it, but I also know anything that I do that I love, I become really good at it. So I'm looking forward to a bright future in podcasting, and really helping people understand what astrology is and how it can be useful to them.
I don't know about you. Go back and watch my first episode, man. I've been great since day one. So no, I'm kidding. It's funny that you talk about that too, because if you do watch some of the early, like I would say first 10, 15, 20 episodes, even when I start talking about my own cannabis use, because I put this on my own Facebook and Instagram and everything else, I was always hesitant, or I would talk about it quickly and everything else. And now I'm at this point where like you just said, I'm probably more open on this show than I am with everybody except my wife, right? I'm probably more open on here than I am around my friends and my family. And it's crazy to me because right now it does feel like I'm just talking to you, but there are going to be thousands of people who see this, right? So, you know, it's crazy. They're watching our conversation. I don't know. It's just something about this long form conversation. And I ask you if you have fun, because I really started having fun with this show. Like, it's just, you get to meet a lot of really cool people, and I just see you on these shows and you look like you're having fun. And it's funny to me, I actually will have more fun doing somebody else's show than this one, because
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure you feel the same way, because when I'm on someone else's show, I truly get to just kick my feet up and respond. Here, like, I'm just like, all right, are we carrying the conversation good? Your image froze 5 minutes ago. I'm like, oh my God, is he going to disconnect? Do we have to start this over again? Like, all this stuff. So I have a level of stress while I'm doing this. But when you become a guest on a show, it's just, okay, I'm on the couch. What do you want to talk about? So
I find like I feel like being the host of a podcast, there's like this weird thing where you're in the moment, and like there's like you go into the conversation, and then like this idea, okay, like what's the next question, like, right? And people say things in our minds, the mind is going like this, and then you're still having to be present and have this conversation. You know, it's challenging and it's difficult, but anything that's challenging and difficult that you keep doing, you get really good at it. And so I'm most excited about just getting really good at this. And you mentioned it too, the interesting people that come on. You know, we had a doctor, Dr. Carl Hart. He's a PhD doctor, professor. He's the chair of psychology at Columbia, Ivy League school. And he's done his research on substance abuse. That's his research. In a lab, they give people drugs and they see how they respond, okay? So he's expert in his field. And he wrote a book called Drug Use for Grownups, okay? Drug use for grownups. And so I talked to a PhD doctor who studies drug use about his heroin use. You know, in the article that piqued my, it's taboo, it's edgy. The article that piqued my,
that's the guy from Columbia, right?
Yeah, Dr. Hart. And so
Yep.
I saw the title of his. He might be an interesting person to come on your podcast. he's just a smart dude, and so much of what we've been talking about, it was healing. It was so healing for me because I always thought about set and setting, when using psychedelics. Cannabis is a psychedelic, but set and setting, how the people you're around and your environment is so important to your experience. But the one thing I didn't think about is the social milieu, the socioeconomic milieu, right? That what's going on in your life, right? Are you poor? Are you rich? Do you feel that people have their thumb on you? Do you feel all these they affect your use of mind altering substances, right? And I never thought about it. And then I've known about this, but his research, he really spoke to how race has been so much a part of the drug war, right? And the example he uses, being a professor at Ivy League school, he's around a lot of rich old white people, right? And he would notice that most, if not all of them, did drugs, right? Had a relationship, but they were all highly functioning and highly successful, and people left them alone, right? But someone like me, NFL football player, African American, fails a test for smoking cannabis, and the world ends, right? And so he's just noticing these disparities, and it was just a really enlightening conversation, and I feel so grateful that I have a podcast, so I have an avenue to have these conversations. And then the fact that thousands of people are going to hear that conversation, I just think of how many people are going to be healed from what I call bullshit shame about cannabis or about any alters, right? There's so many people on this planet that are carrying around bullshit shame. It's crazy around cannabis.
No, you're 100%, and I have so many people that I know that are friends that are regular users, and they still don't talk about it. And they'll talk about it with me because of what I do. And it's funny to me because like I have a friend who works he's a stockbroker, and the people in his office will talk about the benders they went on all weekend, or doing lines or any of that other stuff. But God forbid if he talked about smoking a joint or two, like almost said his name. I don't have anybody to edit this out either. Like, oh, he's lazy, right? So, it's funny to me. That's something I noticed about on real podcasts is I actually just have me. So I have to not say someone's name. Can't edit it out later. But yeah, man, it's just really interesting. And I love that you have this platform because the thing I'm most interested in with your podcast is going to be your guest selection, right? And I said this to Matt when you started is I really think that you're going to be in the same vein as Rogan, where we're going to see the sports stars, the guys that you've been friends with forever, I'm sure, but we're also going to see a lot of people coming out of left field that you're interested in, the people in astrology and the people in herbalism and everything else, and you're going to put them right into the spotlight. And I think Joe Rogan does a great job with that, and to have somebody else to do that too in your given your background, because you have this, we talk about this a lot, marketing you span so many demographics. You have your traditional male football fan, you have a female demographic with the yoga and the spirituality, you have the cannabis folks, you have the astrologers, because when you open your mouth they know that you're as real as they come when it comes to that. So I'm just really interested to see the future of Curious Questions and just the roster of guests that you're going to have on the show. That's really what excites me about it.
Yeah, the idea behind the show is in one sense to highlight, hopefully I ask interesting questions that that my guests haven't been asked before, and so they're able to publicly share parts of themselves that they haven't. And I think that's great for their fans who are listening to the show. But really the show is for, like I had Bethany, the lead singer from Best Coast, and that was one of my
Yes.
favorite. That was one of my favorite conversations because and it's funny, I've had like a lot of Scorpios on the show, and so I'm doing that show for all the Scorpios, right? People that have been hard on themselves or internalized other people's judgments of them for being who they are. And I think when you have quote unquote famous people who are holding that Scorpio energy in a way that's working for them, I think it's empowering to people. And so it's really, at the core of astrology, what we're saying is there's basically 12 basic energies in the universe, okay? And we're all comprised of those 12, a combination of different variations of those 12 energies. And so sometimes you might have 90% of this one energy and you have a little bit of this other, right? and learning to be okay with that, and to realize, this is what my life is about. This, it's not about this. And so just giving people permission to be themselves, and I think that's what I have to, I think that's the greatest gift that I have, is hopefully my story is evidence, right? That regardless of how rich or how famous you are, if you're not yourself, what's the point?
Yeah. You've certainly inspired me. And I will tell you, I remember hearing you say that that was your favorite episode. And I could kind of tell going into it, just the conversation you were having. I can tell you as a fan, my favorite episode so far has been Chris Jones from Esquire, because to me, that was just two old friends sitting down and catching up. And there's a podcast I really like, Bill Burt, which is Bill Burr and Burt Kreischer. And to me, I always feel like that's just Bill and Burt catching up every week on a friendly phone call. And like the one that you had with Chris, I felt like I honestly felt like I was in the room with you two, and maybe you might have been passing a joint back and forth and just telling great stories from your time together. And I felt like I was a part of it. I felt like, I experienced that with you. And that was 100. I definitely love that episode.
Yeah, that was fun. I hadn't spoken to Chris in several years, since Miami, and to that it came up because earlier, that the week before we recorded the podcast, he just randomly tweeted something about me. And I remember I was in the airport and I looked on my phone and it said that I was trending on Twitter. And I was like, what what did I do? Did I fail another drug test or something? And so I was like freaking out, looking on my phone, and I was like, oh, it was just Chris, happened to post something, and it just caught fire. And so I thought, what a great time to bring him in and talk to him. So it was cool.
That's awesome, man. So you've got the podcast. You're doing great there. You're getting to be on all the shows that I listen to. Like I said, Fire and the Kid. I hope you have Brendan on the show. I'm a big fan of his, and I would love to. Excellent, awesome, and make sure he gives you some of that thick boy gear too. I've got a few of it here.
Yeah, I will. I'll let him know ahead of time, so he brings it to the taping.
There you go, man. So next, I want to talk about Leela, because I think, you know, it's a really interesting concept, man. Just leveraging your knowledge of astrology and how it's helped you and everything else to form. And I remember when you talked about it originally, it was a dating app, and now it's just kind of an overall relationship app. It could be for couples that are together, people that are finding each other, even just friends. Can you dig into Leela a little bit more? Because I know that's your true passion project right there. You've got a lot of things going on, but I'm sure if someone, gun to your head said, Ricky, you have to drop everything except one, I have a feeling that Leela would be what sticks.
It would be tough. It'd be tough between Leela and Heisman, and because I think they both have the potential to make the world a better place. And Leela through information. So Leela came about. I told the story of 2004. I met her name is Swami Sita, my astrology teacher, and she started to teach me astrology. So I studied astrology more or less on my own for almost 15 years. I'm in my second marriage. So I was married to my first wife, and she wasn't into it. So it was just me in my office, like reading and looking at charts. So my first wife and I decided that we're better off as friends. So we decided not to be married anymore. And I happened to meet Linnea, and I'm talking about astrology, and she loves it. And so we kind of bond about talking about this kind of subject. And she gets so intrigued that Linnea starts taking classes with me. Learning, and she learns astrology really, really fast, and it becomes like the language we speak in the house. Okay. And I started to notice issues from my first marriage that would show up in my relationship with Linnea. We were able to handle them more consciously, mainly because we were older and more mature, but really because we had astrology. So we had a better understanding of what's going on. I'll give an example. Okay. So how when you're first falling in love with someone, right? You're first falling in love with someone, and everything is great, right? Like everything about them is perfect, okay? And then as you go along, you have that first fight, right?
Yeah.
You have that first fight, and the question of like, are we going to survive this, right? Is this the end? Are we going to survive this? And for us, it lasted like a week. It was like whatever we tried to talk about, within 2 minutes, it turned into a fight, right? And again, all this fear, both of us. Oh, it was fun while it lasted, but I guess, it wasn't real. And so finally, like, let's look and see what's going on in our charts, right? So I pull up my app on my phone, and I look at her chart and I look at my chart, and it's like, whoa, okay, the planet Mars, right? I mentioned the planet Mars is the
Hmm.
planet of assertion and aggression, and that's real. Okay, and we realized in our previous relationships, right? Whenever there was fight, we would like disengage or try to avoid it. But in this new relationship, right, we understand what Mars means. It means that for a relationship to last a long time, you got to find a way to fight well. Because if you don't fight, resentment builds and you don't want the other person to touch you. If you fight too
Hmm.
much, resentment builds and you don't want that person to touch you. But if you find that right amount of fighting, I call it the breakdown to breakthrough ratio, right? If you're breaking down way more than you're breaking through, right? That's too much. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
If there's never breakdowns, that's not enough. Okay. Because otherwise you don't grow, you don't move in a relationship. And so this understanding all came from being in a relationship and also using astrology. So the magic moment was my astrology teacher, Stephen Forrest, gave a workshop on relationship astrology. And I hadn't really studied relationship astrology. So Linnea and I take this class, and I was just blown away at all the insights. And we almost every other word he said, we'd look at each other and smile because we were like, wow, this is so amazing. And so after that class, after that weekend, we went to our teacher and we said, we got so much out of this class. It's really helped us understand each other more and really feel ready to take our relationship to the next level. We need to find a way to get this information out to the world. And so we asked Stephen if he would come on as our partner and help us build an app. We call it the Ultimate Relationship App, that helps people first understand themselves, then understand their friends, family, partners, and then we help them figure out, okay, how do we make this work? And
That's
so
funny,
we led
man.
the Ultimate Relationship App. We leverage astrology to help people have happier relationships, deeper and happier relationships.
Who would ever thought the 1998 Heisman Trophy winner would be helping people with clarity in their life and having better relationships?
Yeah. Helping people become a
So,
Heisman Trophy winner in their own relationships. Yes.
funny story, and she's probably going to get mad at me for saying this. My wife literally just texted me and said, "We have the right amount of fighting." So at least I know she watches the show. That's good. Um, so, dude, you've got so much going on. There's one group of people I want to shout out before we talk about the last thing is Heisman, because I'm really excited about that. But you've gotten to know a group of people that I've actually known for a very long time, and they have one of the better brands out in California, and those are the folks over at Jeter, Dreamfields, right? I don't know if you've gotten to meet Anthony. I've known Anthony since I was in elementary school. He works with Lucas and those guys. Anthony literally was the person that when I started getting into cannabis, I looked at him and I'm like, well, this can't all be about lazy people, because you're one of the smartest people I know, one of the hardest workers I know, and you smoke all day. So, I remember turning to him for my journey. And then I look at Lucas and what he's doing. He would be a very interesting one to have on the show. Because he does run, he exited a very successful company, but I look at him from a marketing standpoint. And this he's my age, but he's a genius when it comes to marketing. I mean, the Blockbuster setup and everything that they've done, I'd be really interested to see you kind of go into his story and pick that apart, because he's really been behind the scenes of building one of the biggest cannabis companies in California just from a pure branding standpoint. And I think he's done a great job. I know you're a big fan of Jeter too.
Oh, I mean, yeah. Might get in trouble from my wife. I'm kind of too big of a fan of Jeter, but it's a cool, it's a cool story considering that they're from South Florida, in the Boca area, and when I met him, it was really cool. I hadn't really heard about Jeter. I had just seen the baby Jeters in the dispensaries, and when Matt introduced me to Luke and the team, you know, they're fans, right? They're kids when I was playing for the Dolphins, and so there was this instant connection. And then as they kind of lifted up the hood on their operation, you said it. He's a branding and marketing genius, and
Mhm.
what Jeter has been able to do. And the more I get into the business and I have a greater appreciation for it, it's amazing because it's not only, a lot of times when people are really good at branding or marketing, it's the story is you can put anything in this packaging, people are going to buy it, right? But when I got to look under the hood of their actual operation, right, they're meticulous, right? Like their infused joints, like it's a workshop. It's
Yeah.
real. So it's not just the branding and the marketing, it's the quality that's underneath it. And I think when you have both of those and they come together, people buy your products, but they keep coming back. They keep coming back. And that's why we tapped Luke to help us, with the Heisman. And and he really took the lead in coming up with our logo. And so, and I try to pick his brain as much as I possibly can, because it's he's got so many wonderful ideas.
Well, here's my idea. So you're going to be launching Heisman this year. You're a pretty large dude. I'm not small myself. Let's just kidnap him, and we'll just kidnap him, hold him in a room until we get everything we need out of him, and then we'll launch Heisman, and we can do that. I think that might be the plan.
We've been in talks, and we talked about doing a collab with Jeter and Heisman, and hopefully that comes to fruition. But the thing I'm really excited about, you mentioned Luke, and their successful exit, is the Super Bowl is in LA next year, and it'll be the first time a Super Bowl is in a recreationally legal state. And so I know that Luke and the gang knows how to throw a party. So look out for a Heisman Jeter Super Bowl party coming up in February.
I got to make sure I get that invite, man. So how much can we talk about Heisman? Can you talk about the launch yet? I know a lot of things are still in the works, but you are launching your own weed brand. It is under the Heisman name. That's a name that you've had for a while, man. I think this is really exciting. I remember when I met you last year, I'm like, I can't wait till you get back into the THC space. And I'm really excited to see this. So, I mean, just tell us as much as you can.
Yeah, so the name, obviously it's spelled Highsman, and it's kind of obvious, but I was visiting a dispensary in Denver, Medicine Man, cool guys, dispensary in Denver, and they have this board where they have people sign autographs. And so the guy gave me a Sharpie. He's like, will you sign your name here? And so I signed my name. He was like, can you write the Heisman? And I started to write it, and he was like, no, spell it Highsman. And then I wrote that, and I was like, I like that. It kind of stuck. And so I started describing myself as the Heisman, and then thinking about launching a THC brand. I kept coming up with this idea of when I was growing up, and we talked about it, right? The jocks didn't smoke, right? And how, at least my upbringing, cannabis and sports were always so separate, and now, and the idea came. So I do a lot of memorabilia signings. Okay. I sign autographs, and since I retired, I've made probably, anywhere between 50 and 60K a year just signing my name. Okay. The last 2 years, I'm averaging, over 6 figures, because I'm signing cannabis inscriptions. Right. So that, to me, I was like, my business tripled in this area because I'm signing smoke weed every day, or puff run, or smoking, scoring points and smoking joints. Right. And so I've realized that people are starving to be able to integrate sports in their cannabis usage. And so I feel like I was put on the earth to bring those two together. And so in Heisman, even the name brings those two together. People recognize it because I was a Heisman Trophy winner, but that word high, right? It was something that I was shamed for. And now it's something that we get to celebrate together. And so it's a cannabis brand, but more specifically, it's a cannabis lifestyle brand, right? It's a cannabis lifestyle brand that brings together the idea of cannabis and high achieving, whatever that looks like, right? Whatever that looks like for you.
That's awesome, man. I think that brings us full circle, because we talked about the evolution of cannabis use, how it's helped us both. And, I could easily transition into just cannabis and into working out and wellness and sports, but it is 9:15 here on the East Coast. I have not eaten dinner, and, I'm afraid that that right amount of fighting that me and the wife have might go into the too much territory if I do this any longer. Ricky, man, I have absolutely had a blast having this conversation. I can't wait to do this again.
Yeah, I can't wait till we have the Heisman retreat and you come out again. Be looking forward to that.
Absolutely, man. I want to film an episode on that balcony out in Idlewild, because one of my favorite places. I know this is such a stoner cliche, but one of my favorite places I've ever smoked. So
Yeah.
definitely need to do one up there.
Let's do it again.
Absolutely, man. Well, I will let you go, but of course, you do podcasts. We got to let you plug everything that you're doing. So let's get the plugs out there before we say goodbye to everybody.
Yeah. So Curious Questions with Ricky Williams, you can get it wherever you watch your podcasts. Heisman brand is launching in Southern California on 4/20, Oregon too. And so keep an eye out, because our goal is to be one of the first national brands. And I think because we're combining sports and cannabis, we could accomplish that goal. So I'm excited about it. Please keep an eye out, and you can check me out on Instagram at Williams, and on Twitter at Rick the Laureate. Because one of my goals in life is to win a Nobel Peace Prize.
Dude, that's awesome. I honestly, I don't think that is completely out of reach for you. So we will stay tuned, and we will definitely have Williams back in the future, folks. Thank you for joining us and paying attention. This is definitely the longest podcast we've done, but it's probably also one of the better ones that we've done. If you missed any part of this conversation, it will be live on our YouTube page on Monday at youtube.com/elevate your grind. Just like Curious Questions, this podcast, Elevate Your Grind, is available on all of your podcast audio platforms. So check us out there. Little bit of housekeeping. We have a live event in person on Thursday for Cannabis Lab. More information about that, joinclab.com. And of course, our national virtual events are still continuing. We have one on the 25th, and we will have 2 more next week. You can get those at joinclab.com. Folks, this has probably been one of my favorite episodes of Elevate Your Grind, and we will see you tomorrow.